Imagine a day when Brazil, as we know it, almost ceased to exist. A day when the threads holding the nation together were stretched so thin they were about to snap. This was not a distant colonial conflict or a 19th century rebellion. It happened on November 11th, 1955. On this day, the country teetered on the brink of a full-blown civil war. The government was in disarray, the military was divided, and cities like Rio de Janeiro became chessboards for generals and politicians playing a dangerous game. For a few tense hours, Brazil held its breath, staring into an abyss from which it might never have returned. The future was a blank page, and it could have been written in blood. The air in Brazil during those days was thick with tension and uncertainty. It was a palpable feeling on the streets, in the cafes, and in the halls of power in Brasilia. The suicide of President Getúlio Vargas a year earlier had left a deep political wound that refused to heal. The nation was adrift, caught in a storm of conspiracies, accusations, and power grabs. The recent presidential election, won by Juscelino Kubitschek and his vice president João Goulart, was not a source of stability but a trigger for further conflict. Powerful forces, both in politics and within the armed forces, refused to accept the results. They saw the victors as a threat to their vision of Brazil, and they were willing to do anything to stop them from taking office. This was not merely a political dispute confined to newspaper headlines and angry speeches in Congress. The threat was real and immediate. It involved tanks rolling through the streets, warships aiming their cannons at the coast, and generals giving conflicting orders to their troops. Brazil was a house divided against itself. The army was split, the navy was split, and the air force was split. Brother was prepared to fight brother, all in the name of different ideas about what Brazil should be. The very concept of a unified nation was at stake, threatened by the ambitions of men who believed they knew best, even if it meant tearing the country apart to save it. The potential for chaos was immense. A civil war would have been devastating, pitting regions against regions and soldiers against soldiers. The economic and social progress the country had painstakingly achieved could have been wiped out in a matter of weeks. The democratic institutions, already fragile, would have been the first casualties. The dream of a modern, prosperous Brazil, symbolized by the promises of Juscelino Kubitschek, was in danger of being replaced by a nightmare of internal conflict and military dictatorship. That day, November 11, 1955, represents a critical, yet often overlooked moment when history paused, and the fate of a nation of millions hung precariously in the balance. To understand the crisis, we must look at the cast of characters and the political stage they occupied. After Getúlio Vargas's death, his vice president, Café Filho, assumed the presidency. However, his health was fragile. The political landscape was dominated by the conservative União Democrática Nacional, or UDN, a party fiercely opposed to the legacy of Vargas, known as Getulismo. They viewed the recently elected duo, Juscelino Kubitschek and João Jango Goulart, as heirs to this populist tradition. Jango, in particular, was seen as a dangerous leftist, a perception that alarmed powerful sectors of the military and the elite. The UDN, led by figures like Carlos Lacerda, openly called for a military intervention to prevent JK and Jango from ever reaching the presidential palace. The situation grew more complicated when President Café Filho suffered a heart attack just days before the scheduled inauguration. According to the Constitution, the next in line was Carlos Luz, the president of the Chamber of Deputies. Luz was known to be closely aligned with the anti-Getulista factions who wanted to block JK's presidency. His brief time in office was marked by suspicion and political maneuvering. He quickly made moves that seemed to confirm the fears of the legalists within the armed forces. It became clear that he was not a neutral caretaker, but an active participant in the plot to subvert the election results. The stage was set for a confrontation, a clash between those who wanted to respect the vote and those who wanted to impose their own will. Within the armed forces, there was a deep and bitter division. On one side were the golpistas, a group of high-ranking officers who believed that the military had a duty to intervene in politics to save the country from communism and corruption. They saw JK and especially Django as threats to national security. On the other side were the legalistas, officers who believed the military's role was to uphold the Constitution and ensure a stable transition of power, regardless of their personal political preferences. This group was led by a stern and disciplined figure, the Minister of War, General Henrique Teixeira Lott. He was a man of few words but firm convictions, and he believed the election results had to be respected. This internal military conflict was the powder keg. While politicians debated and conspired, the real power lay with the generals and their control over the troops and weapons. The loyalty of each battalion, each ship, and each airbase was in question. A single order could trigger a chain reaction leading to widespread conflict. The question on everyone's mind was which side would blink first. Would the conspirators succeed in installing a new regime, or would the legalists manage to defend the democratic order? Brazil was a ship sailing into a storm, with two captains fighting for control of the helm, and the crew was being forced to choose sides. The crisis erupted on November 11th. General Lott, sensing that Carlos Luz was actively supporting a coup against the elected president, resigned from his position as Minister of War. Luz immediately replaced him with a general sympathetic to the coup plotters. This was the final straw for Lott. He concluded that the only way to save democracy was to act decisively. In the early hours of the morning, he launched what became known as a contragolpe, or counter-coup. His objective was simple and direct: to remove Carlos Luz from power and guarantee that the constitutional order would be followed, ensuring that Juscelino Kubitschek would eventually be inaugurated. The city of Rio de Janeiro, then the nation's capital, awoke to the sights and sounds of a military takeover. General Lott's troops, loyal to the legalist cause, moved swiftly to secure key strategic points. They surrounded the Catete Palace, the presidential residence, and took control of police headquarters and military garrisons. Tanks rumbled through the downtown streets, a stark and intimidating display of force. The city was on lockdown. For the average citizen, it was a moment of profound fear and confusion. Was this a coup? A revolution? No one was sure. The only certainty was that the military was in control, and the country's future was being decided not by votes, but by guns. The conflict was not limited to land. A dramatic standoff took place at sea. The acting president, Carlos Luz, along with his allies, including the influential journalist Carlos Lacerda, fled to the cruiser Almirante Tamandaré. From the ship, they hoped to establish a rival government and rally other parts of the military to their cause. They planned to sail to Santos in São Paulo and create a center of resistance. However, General Lott's forces were one step ahead. The coastal forts under his command were ordered to fire on the Almirante Tamandaré if it tried to leave Guanabara Bay. For several tense hours, the nation watched as one part of the Brazilian Navy aimed its cannons at another. This confrontation between military factions was the moment Brazil came closest to civil war. Lott's legalist troops controlled the capital, but the allegiance of military units in other states was uncertain. The coup plotters on the Almirante Tamandaré believed they could still win, hoping that forces in the south would join their cause. The country was effectively split in two, with one government on land in Rio and a potential rebel government at sea. A single miscalculation, a single shot fired in anger, could have ignited a conflict that would have spread across the country. The unity of Brazil was hanging by a single, fragile thread. No centro desse episódio dramático estava o general Henrique Teixeira Lott. Ele não era um político ou um líder carismático. Era um soldado profissional, conhecido por sua disciplina, seriedade e um compromisso inabalável com a hierarquia e a legalidade. Lot não era um apoiador da plataforma política de Juscelino Kubitschek. Na verdade, suas opiniões pessoais provavelmente estavam mais alinhadas com os conservadores. No entanto, sua lealdade não era a um partido político, mas sim à Constituição brasileira. Ele acreditava que a vontade do povo, expressa por meio de uma eleição legítima, era sagrada, e que o dever das Forças Armadas era protegê-la, não subvertê-la. Suas ações não tinham a ver com escolher um lado político, mas sim com defender o próprio processo democrático. A decisão de Lot de lançar o contragolpe foi um risco enorme. Ele estava desafiando o presidente interino e uma poderosa facção dentro das Forças Armadas. Se falhasse, teria sido julgado por traição. Mas ele acreditava que a alternativa, permitir que um golpe se concretizasse, seria muito pior para o país. Lot coordenou suas tropas com maestria, isolando os conspiradores e demonstrando força esmagadora, sem disparar um único tiro contra eles. Sua estratégia era tornar a resistência inútil. Ao garantir a segurança da capital de maneira tão eficaz e impedir que o se tornasse um centro de comando móvel, ele cortou a cabeça da cobra antes que pudesse reunir apoio do resto do corpo. Crucialmente, o movimento de Lot foi preventivo. Depois de depor com sucesso Carlos Luz, ele não tomou o poder para si. Não instalou uma junta militar, nem se declarou novo líder do Brasil. Em vez disso, garantiu que a linha constitucional de sucessão fosse restabelecida. O Congresso foi convocado e votou pelo impeachment de Carlos Luz, nomeando o próximo na linha, o presidente do Senado, Nereu Ramos, como novo presidente interino. Ramos tinha uma missão: governar o país até 31 de janeiro de 1956 e entregar o poder aos legitimamente eleitos Juscelino Kubitschek e João Goulart. O objetivo de Lot nunca foi governar, mas sim garantir uma transição pacífica e legal de poder. Essa distinção é fundamental. As ações de Lot são frequentemente chamadas de golpe preventivo. Foi uma intervenção militar para impedir outra intervenção militar. Um movimento paradoxal. Usar meios antidemocráticos, ou seja, a força militar, para salvar um resultado democrático, a posse de um presidente eleito. A contenção de Lot foi notável. Com todo o poder militar do país em suas mãos, ele escolheu devolvê-lo aos civis. Demonstrou que um general podia intervir não por ambição pessoal ou ideologia política, mas pelo bem da estabilidade institucional. Foi sua postura firme e decisiva que afastou o Brasil do abismo do caos. E se o general Lot tivesse falhado? Ou se ele tivesse escolhido um caminho diferente? As consequências teriam sido catastróficas. Se os conspiradores tivessem conseguido estabelecer um governo rival em São Paulo, o Brasil teria sido dividido. Uma guerra civil teria se tornado quase inevitável, colocando o Sul industrializado contra o resto do país. Um conflito assim teria destruído a economia nacional, devastado a infraestrutura e custado inúmeras vidas. O sonho de unidade e progresso que definia a identidade brasileira teria sido substituído por uma realidade de fragmentação e derramamento de sangue, talvez levando até a uma divisão permanente da nação. Mesmo se uma guerra em larga escala tivesse sido evitada, outro caminho sombrio era possível. Os golpistas poderiam ter conseguido tomar o governo central, cancelar o resultado das eleições e instalar uma ditadura militar. Isso teria sido o prelúdio para o regime que acabaria tomando o poder em 1964. A presidência de Juscelino Kubitschek, um período lembrado pelo otimismo, pelo florescimento cultural e pela construção de Brasília, nunca teria acontecido. O Brasil teria mergulhado em uma era de repressão política 9 anos antes, mudando fundamentalmente o rumo de sua história moderna e sufocando um período vibrante de desenvolvimento democrático. Apesar de sua importância, a crise de 11 de novembro de 1955 permanece um capítulo surpreendentemente obscuro na história do Brasil. Ela é ofuscada pelos eventos mais dramáticos de 1954, com o suicídio de Vargas, e de 1964, com o golpe militar. No entanto, esse episódio oferece uma das lições mais importantes sobre a República Brasileira. A democracia não é algo garantido. É uma construção frágil que exige vigilância e defesa constantes. Esse dia mostrou como desentendimentos políticos podem rapidamente se transformar em ameaças existenciais e como ambições pessoais podem colocar em risco uma nação inteira. Revelou as tensões profundas que sempre existiram na sociedade e nas instituições brasileiras. Essa história precisa ser lembrada. Serve como um lembrete poderoso de que o futuro de um país pode depender das decisões difíceis tomadas por poucos indivíduos em momentos críticos. As ações do General Lott, um homem que escolheu a legalidade acima da ideologia, salvaram o Brasil de si mesmo. Conhecer essa história não é apenas um exercício acadêmico, é um dever cívico. Ela nos ajuda a entender os riscos que nossa democracia já enfrentou e nos prepara para reconhecer sinais de alerta de ameaças semelhantes no futuro. Proteger o futuro democrático do Brasil exige que aprendamos com os momentos em que ele quase não teve futuro algum.